There are numbers, and then there are the kinds of numbers that signal something has fundamentally shifted. This week, Newsweek released polling and web traffic figures that fall firmly into that second category. Meghan's approval rating in America, her home country, and the market on which her entire post-royal commercial identity has been built fell by 13 points across 2 quarters. At the same time, traffic to her website has been declining almost month after month since January, with U.S. visits nearly cut in half between December and April. The popularity figures for Meghan Markle in her home country are, frankly, striking. A 13-point decline over 2 quarters. Nearly half of American web traffic gone in just 4 months. And this is happening in the only market the brand currently serves. Tonight, we're going to break down every key figure from that Newsweek analysis, examine what the web traffic data actually reveals about the health of the business behind the polished Instagram posts and People magazine features, and explore why the pattern surrounding People magazine, which has quietly become a story in its own right, matters when it comes to understanding why the polling numbers are moving the way they are. Let's begin with the YouGov polling, because the methodology is important, and understanding how the system works helps explain what these numbers are really showing. YouGov operates a rolling approval model rather than relying on traditional one-time polls. Instead of conducting a survey at a single moment and publishing the results, responses are gathered continuously throughout the year from a large pool of participants and then compiled into quarterly datasets. That means the figures represent accumulated and sustained public sentiment, rather than a temporary reaction to one particular news event that could briefly send numbers up or down before they return to normal. As polling methods go, it's a more stable and dependable way of measuring how someone is actually performing in public opinion over time, because it is specifically designed to smooth out the noise and reveal the underlying trend. As one recent headline put it, Meghan Markle's coastal kitchen has us eyeing rustic cake stands, floral plates, and other charming finds starting at $9. Now, can we just be honest about this for a moment? Everyone knows that kitchen isn't actually theirs, right? I mean, I'm not exactly a kitchen expert, but there's a reason Meghan never seems to use her own kitchen for the TV show or for the photo shoots. Back in the third quarter of 2025, Meghan was viewed favorably by 37% of respondents and unfavorably by 22%, giving her a net approval rating of +15 in America. That is a positive result. More importantly, it represents a meaningful base of public goodwill in the country she selected as the foundation for both her personal life and her entire commercial operation. For a public figure with strong ties to Britain, who left a major institution, relocated to the most commercially competitive media market in the world, and attempted to launch a lifestyle and food brand from the ground up, a net approval rating of +15 represented a real and valuable asset. Consumer sentiment directly influences commercial behavior, and +15 provided a foundation the business could realistically build upon. By the first quarter of 2026, however, the picture had changed considerably. Liked by 29%, disliked by 27%. Net approval, +2. That's a 13-point decline in net approval over just 2 quarters, measured through a continuous rolling system specifically designed to filter out short-term spikes and drops. And yet they continue pushing out the same manufactured messaging. As many critics have pointed out, it increasingly looks like pure Sussex propaganda, while ignoring realities that people can clearly see for themselves. To understand why this decline matters, it's worth considering how movement in a rolling poll usually works. A celebrity with a major movie release, a significant charitable initiative, or a particularly favorable news cycle might gain 3 or 4 points for a period of time. Someone caught up in a controversy might lose a similar amount before eventually recovering. That's the normal rhythm. Small shifts, temporary fluctuations. A 13-point decline across 2 quarters is not that. This isn't a stumble. It's a sustained downward trend. In any professional communications environment, a movement of that size and consistency would immediately trigger serious strategic discussions about what is causing it and what changes need to be made. A decline of 13 points doesn't simply correct itself by continuing with the same approach and hoping the numbers improve. If it can be reversed at all, that happens by identifying the factors driving the decline and addressing them directly, not by increasing output, while the underlying trend continues moving in the opposite direction. If Palace Insider is giving you the full picture that other channels leave out, the button is right there. It costs nothing and it helps keep the channel running. Now let's move on to the web traffic data. Newsweek's Jack Royston did something particularly useful here. Using similar web data, he tracked monthly US visitor numbers to the ASEver website, and the pattern he uncovered closely mirrors the polling decline. December 2025, 246,000 total visits to the website, including 108,000 visitors from the United States. That American figure is the one that carries commercial significance because, at the moment, the United States is the only market that it ever actually serves. In the past, People magazine could argue, well, maybe the British audience doesn't like Meghan, but she still has strong support elsewhere. That argument becomes much harder to make when you look at the new figures Jack Royston revealed in Newsweek. The brand currently has no international distribution network. It lacks export certification for other major markets. Traffic coming from Australia, the UK, Europe, or anywhere else largely represents curiosity rather than commerce. Those visitors may be checking out the story, watching product videos, or reading the latest brand announcements, but they have no direct route to becoming customers. The only traffic that truly matters from a revenue standpoint is American traffic, and in December, that number stood at 108,000 visitors. January 2026 brought 268,000 total site visits. On the surface, that appears to be growth if you're only looking at the headline figure. But US traffic actually declined to 89,000. Overall traffic increased because the website glitch that exposed warehouse inventory data generated worldwide interest and attracted visitors from across the globe. The traffic that could not generate sales surged. The traffic that could generate sales fell. The headline number and the commercially relevant number moved in opposite directions, and for the business itself, only one of those figures really matters. February saw 213,000 total visits, with roughly 83,500 coming from the United States. Lower across the board, global traffic declined from the temporary January spike, and American traffic continued moving downward as well. March delivered a modest rebound that briefly suggested the trend might be stabilizing. 226,000 total visits, approximately 94,000 from the United States. An improvement, certainly, but still below January's American traffic level, and still short of the 100,000 US visitor mark. Then came April, the figure that removes most of the remaining uncertainty about the direction things are heading. 178,000 total visits, just 61,500 from the United States. That means American traffic fell from 108,000 visitors in December to 61,500 in April, a decline of roughly 43% in the traffic that actually matters commercially. This is not a seasonal fluctuation. It's not a one-quarter adjustment. It's a sustained downward trend that produced a lower figure almost every month, with one temporary recovery in March that failed to hold and never came close to restoring December's levels. Put into business terms, whatever level of purchases 108,000 monthly American visitors were generating in December, the brand is now trying to generate sales from a pool of just 61,500. And even those visitor figures overstate actual buying activity. Most website visits do not become purchases. Some visitors are simply browsing, others are comparison shopping. Many arrive from social media because they heard a product mentioned and want to look at it rather than purchase it. The percentage that converts into actual sales is only a fraction of the total traffic. So when traffic falls by 43%, the pool of potential customers shrinks by at least that amount before conversion rates are even considered. Subscribe to Palace Insider so you never miss what we cover next, and leave your thoughts in the comments. What do you think the April figure of 61,500 American visitors says about where this business is headed? Now, correlation is not the same thing as causation, and it's important to be clear about that before going any further. Royston explicitly makes that point in his article, and it's a fair caveat to include. A decline in approval ratings occurring alongside a decline in website traffic does not automatically prove that one caused the other. It's entirely possible that both trends are simply different symptoms of the same underlying shift in public attention and consumer interest. Perhaps audiences are gradually moving on, and both the polling figures and the website numbers are reflecting that broader reality rather than directly influencing one another. That qualification is important and deserves to be stated clearly. At the same time, the shape of the correlation is difficult to ignore. These declines are not merely occurring at roughly the same time. They are unfolding in the same market, moving in the same direction, during the same 6-month period. A 13-point decline in public approval, a 43% drop in commercially meaningful web traffic, both arriving together rather than independently. Two completely separate measurement systems, one operated by YouGov tracking public sentiment, the other operated by SimilarWeb tracking actual website behavior, are arriving at remarkably similar conclusions about the same subject during the same time frame. Whatever is driving the movement, it is appearing in both datasets simultaneously. That kind of dual confirmation makes it much harder to dismiss the trend as random noise or statistical fluctuation. Which naturally leads to the next question. What happened during this period that could contribute to a 13-point polling decline alongside a 43% drop in American website traffic? There probably isn't one single answer. The Newsweek analysis doesn't point to one specific triggering event, and that is likely the correct interpretation. What seems more likely is a cumulative effect created by multiple developments occurring within a relatively short period of time. The Netflix partnership was restructured and then effectively came to an end in March 2026, removing what had been the brand's most significant corporate endorsement. When Netflix's chief content officer publicly stated in August 2025 that the products were consistently selling out at record speed, that comment helped justify continued investment and partnership expansion. In the American consumer marketplace, statements like that carry both commercial value and reputational weight. Netflix is not just another company, it carries global brand credibility. When its chief content officer publicly offers a specific and positive assessment of a brand's commercial performance, that goes far beyond a routine celebrity endorsement. It serves as a signal to the market about what a major corporation believes it is backing. So when Netflix exited its equity position just 7 months later and chose to distribute the remaining inventory internally to employees, rather than through established retail channels, that endorsement was removed publicly, visibly, and in a way that naturally prompted questions about what had changed between August and March. During that same period, the financial challenges surrounding the Archewell Foundation also entered the public record. These included the California delinquency filing, 3 unanswered inquiries from Charity Watch, and reports of a $3 million annual deficit. A charitable foundation facing regulatory scrutiny and a commercial brand are, technically speaking, separate entities. But from the perspective of an American consumer whose impression of Meghan is shaped by the broader Sussex narrative, these developments do not arrive neatly separated into different categories. Then came the warehouse inventory figures that became public through the website glitch in January. And there was also the 8-week gap between the People magazine explanation regarding international expansion in January and the spokesperson's statement in March that no decisions had been made. That created a documented and highly visible contradiction regarding the state of the business, one that spread well beyond dedicated royal watching audiences. The Geneva speech arrived just 18 days before the birthday photographs surfaced in April, generating significant discussion around the perceived gap between public messaging and private behavior. Importantly, this occurred at a moment when approval ratings were already moving downward. None of these individual events on their own would necessarily be expected to move a YouGov rolling approval rating by 13 points. Taken together, however, within a 6-month period, and against the backdrop of growing audience fatigue with the volume of Sussex-related content being produced and distributed, they appear to have created a cumulative effect that is now reflected in the polling data. This is not the kind of situation that can be addressed through a single sympathetic magazine cover or one positive Instagram post. What we are seeing instead is a pattern that has accumulated over time and across multiple independent datasets. It increasingly resembles a settled shift in how a substantial segment of the American public relates to the Sussex story, rather than a temporary reaction that will fade once a particular news cycle moves on. Now let's talk about People magazine, because the context surrounding that relationship has become a story in its own right, and it is directly relevant to understanding why these polling numbers may be moving as they are. The sheer volume of Sussex-related coverage that People has produced in 2026 is extraordinary by conventional journalistic standards. Not extraordinary because it is covering major breaking news. Extraordinary because of the frequency and consistency devoted to a subject who, by the usual metrics of celebrity journalism, is not generating the type of headline events that typically justify continuous feature coverage. We're not talking about major sit-down interviews in the traditional sense. We're not talking about major awards. We're not talking about large-scale commercial launches that would ordinarily warrant ongoing feature treatment. Instead, much of the coverage has centered around product releases, Instagram recaps, analyses of outfits from single appearances, descriptions of kitchen aesthetics, carefully curated lifestyle glimpses, and family references drawn from promotional content. More than 100 articles in the opening months of 2026 alone, built around a relatively small collection of recurring narratives. The devoted mother, the supportive wife, the visionary entrepreneur, the misunderstood public figure, the resilient success story. The framing rarely changes. The subject simply moves between those same 5 characterizations, while new products or recent appearances provide enough surface-level variation to distinguish one article from the next. The narrative structure remains largely identical. The headline changes. The featured product changes. The underlying story does not. One of the most discussed examples in recent weeks involved a People article focused on the aesthetic appeal of Meghan's coastal kitchen. The piece highlighted specific accessories visible within cooking-related content and presented them as though readers might be interested in recreating the look themselves. The issue, of course, is that the kitchen had already been documented as a rented property used for production purposes rather than the Sussex family residence. Yet the article treated the setting as if it reflected the subject's actual home environment, not necessarily because the distinction was unknown, rather because the article was not fundamentally about reporting where Meghan Markle actually cooks. It functioned primarily as a product placement vehicle built around a carefully curated image. And that is the pattern that has become increasingly visible throughout 2026. Coverage that often appears to originate from a communications strategy rather than from traditional editorial judgments about what constitutes newsworthiness. The signal is not any one article viewed in isolation. Almost any individual piece can be defended as a reasonable editorial decision. The signal emerges when looking at the collection as a whole. The sustained volume, the absence of critical framing, the repetition of the same narratives across weeks and months of continuous publication, and the recurring appearance of supportive or defensive coverage in People shortly before potentially controversial Sussex-related developments unfold. That pattern was visible during the Geneva birthday photograph episode, where favorable framing appeared in People before the photographs themselves were released. Whether the reason behind this pattern is a formal commercial agreement, an informal relationship between the Sussex Communications operation and People magazine's editorial ecosystem, or simply a publication that has discovered Sussex lifestyle content generates dependable traffic and has decided to lean into it relentlessly, the observable outcome remains the same. A major American publication is operating as a consistently supportive amplifier of a particular public image, rather than as an independent outlet covering a subject from a distance. The irony is that this creates a very specific problem for the brand that benefits from it. People magazine's coverage is commercially valuable to the Sussex operation because it functions as a trust mechanism. It allows a respected third-party publication to tell American audiences that the subject is successful, likable, and building something meaningful. That mechanism only works as long as readers perceive the publication as independent. Once the volume and consistency of the coverage become noticeable enough to attract public discussion and scrutiny, as they clearly have throughout 2026, that trust mechanism begins to weaken. Readers stop viewing the articles as independent journalism and begin seeing them as managed messaging. And managed messaging, especially when the source is already known, is far less effective at generating genuine consumer confidence than a truly independent endorsement. 100 positive articles from a publication that audiences perceive as functioning almost like a public relations partner, accomplish far less than 10 positive articles from a publication viewed as independent, critical, and willing to scrutinize the subject when necessary. The trust multiplier that gives third-party coverage its value only works when the third party is actually perceived as separate from the brand. The polling figures collected continuously by YouGov during the same period that People magazine's Sussex coverage has reached its highest volume suggest that the diminishing returns of this strategy may no longer be theoretical. They may now be appearing in the data itself. Which brings us back to those polling numbers. A 13-point decline in net approval across 2 quarters in America, measured through a rolling system specifically designed to filter out short-term noise. At the same time, American website traffic has nearly been cut in half. The sustained volume of People magazine coverage did not prevent either of those outcomes. If anything, it may have obscured them from inside the operation longer than a different communications approach might have allowed. Constant positive coverage can create the appearance of momentum even when the underlying indicators are moving in the opposite direction. But appearance is not the same thing as performance. The movement continued regardless. Now, the comparison to Victoria Beckham deserves a closer look because it is frequently cited whenever people discuss what the Sussex commercial strategy might resemble in the future. In reality, the comparison is more useful as a cautionary example than as an encouraging one. Victoria Beckham accomplished something genuinely difficult with her fashion label. She earned legitimacy within the fashion industry itself. Designers took the work seriously. Editors took the work seriously. The brand developed an identity that stood on its own merits, separate from her celebrity status. It won awards. It attracted serious clients. It established credibility in an industry that is famously skeptical of celebrity-driven fashion ventures. Even with all of that, however, the business remained financially unprofitable for years. Not months. Years. The financial support that kept the brand operating while it built credibility, distribution channels, wholesale relationships, and long-term infrastructure came from David Beckham's commercial empire, football contracts, global sponsorship agreements, business ventures, and eventually the investment connected to Inter Miami. For a lengthy period, David's earnings effectively subsidized Victoria's brand while it slowly earned the respect and commercial relationships necessary to become sustainable. That reality was publicly acknowledged, well-documented, and supported through losses that many households simply could not have absorbed over such an extended period. The Sussex situation differs in nearly every area that made the Beckham example viable. The Sussex commercial operation has not secured an equivalent level of critical respect in any of the sectors it has entered. The food brand, the podcasting projects, the Netflix content, the broader lifestyle brand. Across these categories, the critical reception has not produced anything comparable to the industry credibility that fashion critics ultimately granted Victoria Beckham. There is no equivalent industry voice treating Sussex commercial output with the same degree of professional regard that fashion reviewers eventually extended to Beckham's design work. Then there is the question of financial support. The comparison only works if there is an equivalent to David Beckham's sustained multi-year commercial income, an income stream capable of absorbing substantial losses while a new brand gradually establishes itself. Nothing publicly visible within the Sussex financial picture suggests a cushion of that scale. The reported Archewell Foundation deficit, the reported concerns surrounding As Ever's expansion costs, the absence of any major new commercial partnership announced since Netflix's departure. These are not the indicators typically associated with a financial structure capable of supporting years of operating losses, while a brand slowly builds credibility from the ground up. When people invoke the Beckham comparison at the level of broad storytelling, it can sound reassuring, but when examined at the level of detail the comparison actually requires, it points in the opposite direction. Rather than making the Sussex trajectory appear easier, the parallel arguably highlights how much more difficult the path ahead may be. The comparison is often presented as an encouraging example. In reality, it serves more as a reminder of how challenging the path actually is, and how unusual the conditions were that allowed it to succeed. When the polling figures and website traffic data are viewed together and considered alongside the broader developments from the same period, They suggest that the American consumer relationship intended to support the entire commercial operation has been weakening during the very same 6 months in which key partnerships either ended or contracted significantly. These developments do not appear to be isolated stories. Instead, they look increasingly like different measurements of the same underlying trend. The foundation experienced declining donor confidence while simultaneously facing regulatory issues. The brand saw both website traffic and approval ratings fall in its primary market. Its most important corporate endorsement departed publicly and visibly. And throughout all of this, the communication strategy remained largely unchanged. The steady stream of People magazine coverage, the continuous flow of Instagram content, the spokesperson-driven responses, and supportive narratives released ahead of potentially controversial moments. All of it continued at the same pace and in essentially the same format, while the underlying indicators were moving in the opposite direction. That is the picture revealed by the Newsweek figures when the polling data and traffic data are examined together rather than as separate stories. This does not look like a single difficult quarter. It does not resemble a temporary rough patch that can be corrected through a favorable magazine profile or a carefully managed news cycle. What emerges instead is a directional trend appearing across multiple independent measurements within the market that matters most to the entire post-Royal Sussex commercial project. Whether the April figure of 61,500 American website visitors represents a bottoming out point or simply another step in an ongoing decline is a question that future quarterly data will answer. Likewise, whether a 13-point drop in approval ratings marks the low point of the trajectory or the continuation of a broader trend depends largely on what happens to the factors that appear to have contributed to it. Based on the evidence currently available, neither question has an obvious positive answer, and neither question appears to be addressed by the communication strategy that has remained in place throughout the same period in which both sets of numbers have been moving downward. So what do you make of a 13-point decline in approval ratings combined with the loss of nearly half of American web traffic? Can the current strategy realistically reverse those trends? Or does the data suggest something more fundamental has changed in the way American audiences are responding to the Sussex commercial operation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe to Palace Insider so you never miss our next analysis. And if detailed breakdowns of polling data, audience trends, and commercial performance are the reason you watch this channel, hitting the like button is one of the best ways to support more content like this. We'll see you in the next one.